We're back. Like I said, we are back. Bop, 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 boy, fuck 'em up. Bop, 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 bop. Let me do my stuff. All right. Put that video right there. Cool.
These are the 10 largest countries in the world by population right now. Number 10, Mexico. South of the U.S. border down Mexico Way is one of the biggest countries in the world. The third largest country in the Americas, Mexico has a population of just under 128 million and a high birth rate, 18.3 births per 1,000 population, compared to only 5.8 deaths per 1,000 population. It's a highly urban country. It has 55 major metropolitan areas where over half the population lives. The rural areas of the country are much more sparsely populated and tend to have higher indigenous populations. While Mexico grew rapidly during the 20th century, that has been somewhat reversed, and the population seems relatively stable, but it's a young skewing country that's seen as a rising power, and in some ways the future will be defined by one city. Mexico City houses almost a sixth of the country's entire population, making it one of the largest capitals in terms of population percentage in the world. It's the fifth largest city in the world, and it's a busy place that serves as a hub of industry, culture, and retail. If you ask many Americans what the demographics of Mexico were, they might say it's full of Mexicans, but the country is very diverse. It's a melting pot of people descended from Spanish colonists as well as a still strong indigenous population and many immigrants from the Caribbean and Latin and South American countries. And of course, many people are mixed and simply identify as mestizo now, a term that describes people of mixed ancestry with a white European and indigenous background. The country is heavily Roman Catholic, with 78% of the population belonging to the faith. But things aren't all sunshine and rainbows south of the border. As the 13th largest country in the world by landmass, Mexico has one advantage many of the countries ahead of it don't. It has enough room for everyone, but many of its cities can be overcrowded and chaotic. It also has a serious problem with crime and cartel violence, as the recent governments have tried to get the criminal activity under control and arrest gang leaders. Despite this, it's a major tourist destination for Americans thanks to its comparably low cost of living. With a 95% literacy rate, Mexico is a modern nation that's rising in influence, although many governments there have struggled and been voted out because they just can't seem to get a handle on the crime situation. But with the 16th highest GDP in the world, it's likely to keep growing. Now let's head a long way away and way up north. Number 9, Russia. With a population of 147 million people, Russia is one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population. Even so, its president seems to think that the country needs to become even bigger. The biggest country in the world in terms of landmass by a wide margin, it spans across 2 continents, but a large percentage of the country is the frozen territory of Siberia, which is very loosely occupied and has played home to the infamous prison camps known as gulags in the past. Its largest city is Moscow, only the 24th largest in the world, with around a tenth of Russia's population. And hiding beneath Russia's massive population is a very disturbing fact. They have one of the worst birth-to-death rates in the world. Their birth rate is under 10 people per 1,000, while their death rate is at 16.7 per 1,000. In other words, Russia is shrinking, and the story of how Russia got so big is a complicated one. Centuries of aggressive expansion led to the former Duchy of Muscovy integrating mass amounts of land, turning the country into Russia we know today. This means countless countries and ethnic groups were simply told they were Russian citizens now and didn't have much say in it. That makes the country one of the most diverse in the world and also one with some of the most unrest. It has large Muslim minorities as well as residents from other countries around Europe. The country has fought several major civil wars, has border conflicts with many of its neighbors, and has shrunk significantly since its height during the Soviet era. Its immigrant population is the third largest in the world, over 11 million. But migrating to Russia may not be looking all that desirable right now. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, many have started to criticize many facets of the former Second World Power. Between its dictator-like government, its conscription law, and the devastating economic sanctions it finds itself under, things are likely only going to get worse. It currently has the 11th highest GDP, but that might soon drop significantly. Some will find refuge in faith. Russia is heavily Eastern Orthodox Christian, with up to 80% of the population belonging to the faith. Others will find solace in food and vodka, contributing to the country's high risk of cardiovascular disease. And of course, many in the country might find themselves contributing to Russia's death rate when they're sent poorly equipped to Ukraine, as Vladimir Putin attempts to put roughly 40 million people under Russia's control, whether they like it or not. Now, let's get much smaller. Number 8, Bangladesh. A small country on the eastern border of India, Bangladesh is part of the former British Raj that was eventually partitioned into a Muslim country, similarly to Pakistan on the western side. Initially part of Pakistan, it eventually gained its independence in 1971, and it's the most homogeneous country on the list so far. It's 99% Bengali, with over 90% of the population being Muslim and just under 8% being Hindu. It also has one of the highest birth rates in the world, with a whopping 17.71 births per 1,000 people, compared to only 5.54 deaths per 1,000. That means Bangladesh is...
So,
99%
what did everyone make?
90 Muslim,
I made us.
and 8%
one of the fastest growing countries out there, which may be a problem, because Bangladesh is the smallest country on this list. It has a population of just under 170 million, but in terms of landmass, it's only the 92nd largest country in the world, being just a bit bigger than tiny Nepal nearby in the Himalayas.
Small.
That means by necessity, it's a heavily urban country, with its largest city, Dhaka, having over 15% of the total population. Its literacy rate of 74% is considered average for the region, and it has recently seen an increase in refugees and migrants due to crises in nearby countries, such as the targeting of Rohingya Muslims. It's a parliamentary democracy considered to have fair elections, although it has been criticized for its treatment of religious minorities. But can a country of this size really sustain such a large population? Bangladesh's population growth isn't slowing down, and it's quickly running out of space. At the 41st spot in GDP, its economy is growing, but it might not be growing fast enough to keep it from a population crisis. One area where it might be able to find relief is in its education efforts. It's produced a high number of immigrants who have come to the United States, United Kingdom, and other places to work in tech and other fields. Similar to India and Pakistan, one of Bangladesh's biggest exports is its talent, and that might be exactly how it intends to have enough space for its future population. Now let's head across the ocean for something completely different. Number 7. Brazil. Welcome to Brazil, the largest country in South America in more ways than one. It's more than double the size of any other country on the continent, with a size that makes it the 5th largest country in the world. It has a population of over 217 million people, which is more than half the continent's population. And its growth doesn't stop there. It has a GDP that puts it a 10th of the world. Not only is this the biggest in South America, but it has more than half the gross GDP of the continent. So in many ways, South America is defined by Brazil, which makes it surprising that the massive country is a bit of an outlier in some ways. For one thing, it speaks Portuguese when most of the continent speaks Spanish. But that's not the only thing about the massive nation. Brazil is a nation of dichotomies. It's one of the most urban countries in the world, with its largest city, Sao Paulo, having a population of over 21 million, making it the 4th largest city in the world. Two other cities, Rio de Janeiro and Belo Horizonte, also make the list of the top 100 largest cities in the world. But outside of its massive cities, Brazil is home to the Amazon rainforest, one of the world's most biodiverse regions and one of the most endangered. Countless species are at risk of extinction due to expansion into the rainforest, and the country has many uncontacted indigenous tribes that the government is trying to protect, or at least they were until the current government stepped up development. The country's long history of colonization and immigration makes it one of South America's most diverse regions, with close to half its population being of mixed race. So what's it like living there now? Brazil is a modern country with a relatively high standard of living, although this varies drastically by where you live. The birth rate is fairly standard for the developed world, with 13.96 births and 6.81 deaths per 1,000 people. Its 92.6 literacy rate is high, and its education system is considered strong. But in its urban centers, poverty and crime are commonplace, and the country is struggling to get gang activity under control. But its high tourism rate and rich national resources means its economy is likely to keep growing, and its huge coastline means it's a destination for beachgoers for years to come. Now let's head to Africa's only representative on the list. Number 6, Nigeria. We're in tight quarters again, as Nigeria is one of the smallest countries on this list. Not nearly as small as Bangladesh, but in 31st place on the list, it's only just over 356,000 square miles, putting it between the much less populated Tanzania and Venezuela. But Nigeria is exploding in population, with a population of over 218 million people and one of the highest birth rates in the world, a massive 34.19 births per 8.7 deaths per 1,000 people. And as the country's population and economy keeps booming, it raises a question. Where are they going to keep all those people? No surprise, Nigeria is a heavily urban nation, with the capital city of Lagos
That's
being
right.
one of the
Shout out
largest
to my
metropolitan
Nigerian
areas in the
people.
world.
Shout out,
It has
shout
over
out, shout out,
13
shout
million
out.
people, making it the second largest city in Africa. But another reason Nigeria's culture is so unique is that it's one of the most diverse nations around. 90% of the population is almost evenly split between Christians and Muslims, with the other 10% belonging to various indigenous religions. This also means it has a great diversity in language, with the Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba tribes all having significant representation in the country. And it's become a hub for emigration, with millions moving in from China, India, and the United States. And there's a reason for that. Nigeria's economy is also one of the fastest growing in the world, with the current GDP ranking putting it in 31st place. This makes Nigeria the wealthiest country in Africa, putting it ahead of powerhouses Egypt and South Africa. A large part of this is due to its growing strength in the tech and manufacturing sectors, as its education system is one of the best in Africa, at least in the cities. Its literacy rating is around 62%, but there's a big gap between men and women, and that gap is largely driven by the rural, more traditional areas of the country. But that trend will likely be slowly reversed as Nigeria continues to evolve into a global powerhouse in the tech world, which means your next support call might just go right over to Lagos. Now, let's head back to Asia. Number 5, Pakistan. With a population of 242 million, Pakistan is one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, with over 96% of the population subscribing to the faith. The rest are mainly Hindus and Christians, but they're living in a country even smaller than Nigeria. It ranks 33rd on the list, sandwiched between Venezuela and Namibia in size. And it's growing fast, with 27.5 births and 7.2 deaths per 1,000 residents. So that probably means they're one of the most urbanized countries in the world, right? Surprisingly, not quite. While Pakistan does have two of the largest cities in the world, Karachi with over 15 million and Lahore with just under 12 million people, the country is undergoing one of the slowest urbanization processes in the world. That means that many of its citizens live in small communities or in isolated tribal regions.
Learn about crypto and get rewarded as you learn with Coinbase Learning Rewards. We've paid out
where the government has little involvement. That was the case for the mountainous region of Abbottabad, where one unwanted resident, Osama bin Laden, holed up for several years without being detected. But did the government know? No one knows, but the oversight in the more isolated regions of the country is slim at best. And that's left a lot of gaps in the country. In some ways, Pakistan is a powerful country. It's a nuclear power and is considered a major player on the world stage, but its GDP only finds it down at number 44 between Colombia and Chile, and many regions in the country struggle with poverty. That can also be seen in its literacy rate, which only hits 62%. There's a gap between men and women as expected, but this is also due to many of the communities being isolated from the economic centers of the country. The mountainous regions may not even have schools, as parents are left to teach their kids the skills they find relevant. But it's in better shape than many of its neighbors, and recently over 1 million citizens of Afghani descent have come to the country, along with many Indian Muslims who immigrated during the partition. So, what is the largest Muslim country in the world? Number 4, Indonesia. Wait, Indonesia? That collection of islands? Turns out those islands are some of the busiest in the world, housing a massive population of 270 million. Some of its islands have shared borders, with one being split with Papua New Guinea and the large island of Borneo being split between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. But it still has a lot of real estate on its 3 main islands, making it the 14th largest country in the world. Only one of its cities is among the largest in the world, Jakarta, coming in at the number 30 spot with a population of over 10 million. And it's still growing. Indonesia is one of the countries with the lowest birth rates on the list, with only 15.3 births and 6.75 deaths per 1,000 residents. It's a very diverse nation with over 1,300 ethnic groups, most of them native Indonesian. The Javanese are the largest group, making up close to half the population, but the country has a wide range of languages and cultures. The one area where they're more homogeneous? Religion, with 86% of the population identifying as Muslim, while only 10% identify as Christian. The country has a large ethnic Chinese population, their largest foreign-born group, and that's combining into a fast-growing country. Indonesia's GDP is 17th overall place, making it the 6th largest in Asia. It also has a strong education sector with compulsory education for children through 12th grade. This has resulted in a literacy rate of over 92%, one of the highest in Asia. While many children only attend school part-time, outside the tribal regions, there's a strong push toward public education. That's resulted in the country's booming tech sector, with many Indonesian students attending college abroad. While quality of life varies drastically from region to region, the country is a fast-growing power in Asia. Now it's time to talk about the big guns, starting with USA. USA. Number 3, United States of America. USA. We're number 3? Yeah, despite being larger than life in so many ways, the United States isn't actually even close to number 1 in any category of largest country. With a population of 331 million, it's solidly in third place in numbers, and its size matches. Whether it's the third or fourth largest country in the world depends on how you define China's territory. It's so close that disputed territories make the difference. That makes it one of the most spread out countries in the world. As almost all the country is inhabitable, unlike Russia, and its massive swath of Siberian territory where almost no one moves in by choice. With one big exception, of course. A huge part of America's territory is its largest state, way up north in Alaska. It's more than twice the size of any other state, but has one of the smallest populations of any state. The United States has many large metro areas, including 8 in the top 80 cities, including New York, the 11th largest city in the world with a population of over 18 million. But its massive territory means its population is spread out among its cities, suburbs, and rural areas pretty evenly. One of the things that makes the U.S. unique is that it has the most distinct state identities of any country, with all 50 states having their own distinct identities and laws, and only being vaguely unified at times.
What if I told you investing wasn't just for the suits and ties? It's for every
times, but it all comes together into a pretty powerful group. It's probably not a surprise that the United States has the top GDP in the world, with over a quarter of the world's total. It has one of the lower birth rates in the world, though, at 11 births and 10.4 deaths per 1,000 people, keeping it just over breaking even. It's a diverse nation, with the majority of its residents being white, but having significant percentages of Black, Latino, and Asian residents. Christianity is its primary religion, but significant minority populations of Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and other faiths are present, and a growing percentage lists their religion as none. While it doesn't have an official language, English dominates, with Spanish becoming an increasingly big fixture in the country. Its literacy rate is around 99%, but only 79% of those are classified as having moderate or high literacy, meaning 21% have only rudimentary literacy skills. But the next two countries are much, much bigger than the USA. Number 2, India. Not only does India have a larger population than the United States, but it almost quadruples it, with a population of a massive 1.2 billion people. This makes it close to runner-up for the most populous country in the world, and it's expected to climb to number 1 within the next 2 years. This is partially due to a high birth rate, although not one of the world's highest. It's at around 16.42 births and 9.45 deaths per 1,000 people, and it has a lot of room to accommodate all those new people. India is a very large country, coming in at 7th place overall between Australia and Argentina. As the second largest country in Asia, it's a powerhouse in more ways than one, and its influence is only growing. In the past, India would have been even larger in territory, but the partitions of what is now Pakistan and Bangladesh and the aftermath of its independence from the Brits reduced its land area quite a bit. Today, it's primarily a Hindu country, although it does have a large group of religious minorities. 14% of its population is Muslim, largely made up of the descendants of those who chose not to leave during the partition. It also has a small Christian, Sikh, and Buddhist minority. Hindi is the most commonly spoken language, with almost half the population speaking it, followed by Bengali. And it's a country of dichotomies in more ways than one. India has some massive city centers, including 9 cities in the top 80, and the second largest city center in the world, Delhi, which houses over 28 million people. However, many of its people still live in small tribal areas, and poverty is commonplace in the country. India has a thriving tech and manufacturing sector and has risen to the 5th largest GDP in the world. Much like Nigeria and Indonesia, its education sector is strong, and a lot of its talent heads to other countries. Other companies commonly outsource their work to India as well, and that's helped by India having a literacy rate of 74%, not one of the highest in the world, but overall strong. India continues to be seen as one of the fastest growing countries in the world, and many predict a bright future for the nation and its people. But for the country in first place, the future is a bit more cloudy. Number 1, China. China, the largest country in the world with a population of 1.4 billion people, just under 20% of the global population. It's not pressed for space either, being the 3rd or 4th largest country in the world in terms of space. It's fairly homogeneous in terms of ethnicity, with 91% of the population being Han Chinese. In terms of religion, the picture is very mixed. China's communist government heavily discouraged religion for decades, but in recent years, faiths including Buddhism and Chinese ancestor worship have made a comeback, with minorities of Christianity and Islam present. Although the country has a lot of space, a lot of it isn't used up. Much of the population lives in major cities, with the largest being Shanghai, with a population of over 25 million people. These are glitzy, modern metropolitans with a thriving tourism scene. But far away, you can find farmlands and other rural communities, as well as enclaves of minority groups like Uyghurs that are often under
Shanghai.
assault from the government. That hasn't stopped China
crazy.
from becoming a global powerhouse.
250
They're the second
25
highest country in
million
the world
people?
in terms of GDP, being the only country to
Dang.
even approach the dominance of the US. But under the surface, a lot of trouble is brewing. For decades, China had a one-child policy that was strictly enforced to control its population, and it worked a little
Y'all
too
going
well.
crazy
China's
over there.
population declined, and many parents tried to get a boy as their one child, leading to a shortage of women. The policy was eventually reversed, but China still has a low birth rate, only
One-child
7.52
policy?
births compared to 7.18 deaths per 1,000 people. That has led many to worry about a population bust, but that hasn't stopped China from taking a bigger place on the global stage,
Whoa.
both in terms of their economic influence and their aggressive foreign policy moves. Want to know
crazy.
which of these countries is
That's crazy. Yeah, China's still thrashing. They're smart. They're smart people over there. That's crazy. So the top three were USA, India, and China. So shout out my India people. Shout out my China people. Shout out USA. Shout out the other countries, Pakistan, Malaysia. Shout out, trying to remember off the top of my head. Shout out to all those countries. I'm gonna put them all. Try to put all of them in the description below. Shout out to the informant graphs. I'll put them on the below too. I'll put the video down below. This was biggest countries in the world. I told y'all I was gonna get you another video, so there it is. And I'll see y'all on the next one. Bye.